So, right, greetings. Well, hello. It's my friend Dominic is still with me here in the Peace Museum of Europe. We're here in the middle of France. Dominic is from Switzerland, visiting from the University of Berne. And we've just, it's the 3rd of January, so we've just had Brexit, and we've been talking about this a lot. So Dominic's going to ask me a few questions, and and we'll have a sort of little interview thing. So do, introduce yourself again, because people might not have watched your first interviews.
Yeah, my name is Dominic. I'm coming from Switzerland, from Berne, the capital where I live and also study. I study sociology and also a little bit psychology. Yeah, and I'm now here for over 2 weeks studying, learning, doing some assistance work for Thomas Daffern. And yeah, I'm looking forward to to this conversation here about a lot of interesting topics. The first one to start is you have talked about Brexit a lot in the past, and now it just happened. What is like the biggest thing you learned about Brexit?
Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, I started this weekly talk and this weekly fast against Brexit, and now it's happened. And friends of mine have asked me, well, what are you going to do now? You've been opposing Brexit for so long. And now it's happened, like you've lost, right? Well, I'm going to go on speaking the truth as I see it, sharing what little wisdom I as a philosopher can shed on the complex politics of Britain and Europe and the world. I have a duty to carry on. So Christians say, or Christ said, just go forth and speak. You don't have to prepare in advance, you'll be guided by the Holy Spirit, which for Christ was the Spirit of truth. And I think there's a very deep theological value in that text. If I was Meister Eckhart, I'd preach a whole sermon on it, right? So that's all I've been doing each week, is trying to speak from the place of truth, hopefully inspired by what Christians call the Holy Spirit, what other religions call the Shekinah or whatever. I think that Brexit is a sin against the Holy Spirit, which is a sin against truth. And it's the one thing that's unforgivable in Christian theology. And I think Brexit was created by people who deliberately and mendaciously lied to the public. Now, I think that is a sin against the Holy Spirit, and it is unforgivable. I will never forgive these people. And I'm not alone. There are millions of other people that feel like I do. So what I've learned from Brexit is that what I call the machine of war capitalism, because the people responsible for this are the war capitalists. These are the people that run the military machines of death that generate wars. I mean, poor old Karl Marx went to London because he knew that's the centre of capitalism. He spent years trying to understand what capitalism is. He spent years in the British Library, where I've spent years too, right? And he didn't quite understand how the machine operates. He wrote this incredibly sophisticated critique of capital, but he left out the single most lethal and dangerous aspect of it, which is militarism and war. The British Empire perfected to an elite level war capitalism. The banking system of the City of London, which he tried to understand, but he never even put that into Das Kapital, right? I mean, I studied at the London School of Economics and Political Science, the LSE, where my children went to the nursery. I was baptised at the LSE by the chaplain, right? I mean, I come from that. So the LSE was trying to understand what is capitalism and what we can do about it. And the library there is founded by Lionel Robbins, who was a great economist. Again, inspired by the vision of peace. Can we not have an economy that works for peace? Well, the people that have done Brexit don't want that. They want war capitalism to carry on ad infinitum. When I sat and watched Theresa May and knew that her husband, Philip May, was a war capitalist who was funding bombs to drop on Yemen, £1 million a time, with the Saudi government buying them all. You know, I'm ashamed to call myself British when I see war capitalists sitting grinning on the front benches of the Commons, saying, we're doing Brexit, you know. So what I've learned is how ruthless these war capitalists are. They've taken over the British media, they control the BBC like a propaganda machine. They run the main media in the newspaper industry and the social media. Because they have so much money, they can buy consciences, and they can silence intellectual and intelligent opposition. So I've learned, you know, how ruthless they are, what we're up against. And I think the British people as a whole now know, like, you know, these guys will stop at nothing. They will take over a country and propagandize and control its media. I've also learned that there are amazingly good people that oppose Brexit, my fellow compatriots, fantastic people who've given everything in campaigns. I know them personally, I've met them on social media. You know, my sister was one of many millions of people that marched in the streets of London against Brexit. I think there were 3 marches of over 1 or 2 million people in them. You might have seen the pictures. Yeah. Huge demonstrations. Yeah. So the other thing I've learned is the establishment doesn't care about public opinion, doesn't care about marches, demonstrations, which are all peaceful, you know, men, women and children with babies, and, you know, it doesn't care about that. I mean, I was one of the people that marched against the Iraq War in 2003, again, completely ignored. Tony Blair went to war, bombed Iraq, against all international law, against ethics and against right reason. And against truth, because there was no reason to attack Iraq. It was a geopolitical nightmare invented by the neocons in America that had, in my opinion, faked 9/11 or, you know, helped do dodgy stuff around 9/11. The truth had not come out, and here they were. It was a manufactured war, 2003, by the war capitalist elites who run the American establishment and run the British establishment. And Brexit was their child. So we've learned they're ruthless and they ignore oppositional voices. Okay, so I think the other thing I've learned is that to summarise, that the Scots are resilient people. And thank God, I mean, I lived there for 7 years. I don't think they're going to accept this. We have a little chateau up the road here in the middle of France called Chateau Écosse. There were Scots in France. You know, the Scots are an international nation. They had, I mean, their Enlightenment, Adam Smith, David Hume, they were internationalists. Hume spent a lot of time here in France. And a lot of the great French intellectuals, one of my favourites is a man called Duns Scotus, who was a great philosopher, an ontologist. He influenced Heidegger. He came and lectured at the University of Paris. And he inspired Luther. Luther's ideas were actually inspired by Duns Scotus. Because Duns Scotus was a Franciscan, and he argued against Thomas Aquinas and the Dominican school. The Dominican school of philosophers, who I, you know, respect, but they said you can think your way to God. You can like work it out, sit, you know, calculate, and there's God. Duns Scotus said, okay, maybe a bit, but you've also got to act, and you've got to know, you've got to feel, act, and embody the truth that your intellect tells you. You can't just stick at that. And so, you know, Duns Scotus' school of Franciscans was much more, you know, we have to do something about this. And he's inspired lots of great, you know, people, including Luther. So I think the Scots, if they can produce people like Duns Scotus and Adam Smith and David Hume, I mean, they are proper intellectuals and activists. Whether they'll be able to stand up to the might of the war capitalist machinery based in Westminster and Whitehall and Washington DC. We'll have to see. I think the other thing I've learned is that how implicated the American war capitalist machinery has been in this under Trump. You see, Trump to me exemplifies, he's a product of what I call this war capitalist machinery, put in place through propaganda and ruthless social media lies and conspiracy theory, fake conspiracy theories. There are genuine conspiracies like 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination. Then there are fake ones, like all liberals eat babies for breakfast, you know. And what the intelligence services have done behind war capitalism is they've deliberately clouded the whole thing, and they've created fake conspiracies to take people's minds off finding the solution to the real ones. So you see, war capitalism is itself a conspiracy. It's a system whereby people of immense wealth use that wealth to generate further wars, which then in turn create more wealth for the banks, the financiers, and the people behind the military industries. It's a racket. And anyone that opposes it has to really do their homework. That's what I've tried to do as organising philosophers for peace since the 80s. This has been my baby. And Brexit is the latest, what they think is a victory, but I don't think they're going to win. I think the Scots will get independence. I think the European Union as a peace project will prove resilient and strong enough to face down this threat. I also think we need an intelligence agency for the European Union because that's how war capitalism is operating. It's using fake intelligence, plants, God knows what. You know, I know how they operate. And as an intellectual, I'm advocating wisdom for peace instead of intelligence for militarism. MI6, MI5 make me ashamed to be British. They're just promoting war instead of what they ought to be doing, which is preserving peace. And they've colluded in this Brexit nonsense. So that's another thing I've learned. Number 5, the collusion of the intelligence services in the UK. And, you know, that leads me on to the other point about the collusion of the Queen, the collusion of the monarchy. The thing I've learned about Brexit is our constitution is not robust enough to withstand war capitalism. I mean, I used to be, as a Christian, I'm an Anglican, I used to believe the Queen stood for spiritual values. She's the head of the church. She ought to be a Christian. Now, Christians ought to be on the side of peace. They ought to see this and have stopped it. So the supine collusion of the Queen in this Brexit war capitalism nonsense, to me, is the final sellout. It's like, mum's the word, can't say anything. And I had an exchange of correspondence with Buckingham Palace about this. I wrote as, you know, director of my institute and pointed out to Her Majesty that she ought to say something about this and do something. And the reply I got back through her secretary was, well, I can't say or do anything because I'm only a constitutional monarch. However, that is a misreading of her actual powers. She had a right and a duty to prevent this. And the fact that she didn't and colluded, to me, is means that we now need to toughen up our constitution. So the UK needs to get much stricter about, you know, stopping these elite war capitalist agencies, which is the Tory party, is their chosen vehicle. People have bought influence in the Conservative Party, literally, from war capitalist, you know, interests, billionaire types. Join the party. Before long, they're talking to the Prime Minister. So I've learned how corrupt that system is. And I've thought up some remedies, which, you know, I'm happy to share later, but those are the problems we're facing. That's what I've learned. Okay, that'll do. That's
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So we have learned a lot of things from Brexit.
Yeah.
But yeah, fact is that the Great Britain is now not anymore. Is not part of the EU now. It's out of it. Yeah. It's done. So the question is, what are we doing now? we can't change that anymore, that Brexit happened, but what do we have to do now to make it better?
Well, I think we have to, I mean, I'm an intellectual, so I have to study and research the reasons why it happened and try and remedy those. As I say, I think it was based on false thinking. I mean, I'm not even saying that all people that work in the defence industry or for the military are bad people. I think they follow a certain thinking pattern, which is, oh, it's a dangerous world, got to have bigger weapons, got to rule the waves, got to have the best battleships. You know, it's this fear thing. And it's been going for centuries. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm saying that the thinking behind it is wrong. My critique of war capitalism is like Marx plus spirituality. So I put the Geist back into Das Kapital, in my commentary on Das Kapital. I'm trying to put Geist back in and say this is an ethical struggle. Marx was trying so hard to be a scientist that he left ethics out because, you know, talk about right and wrong in science, you know. Because in the 19th century they had this neutral view of science. It was totally objective.
Max Weber,
descriptive and didn't make value judgments. Now that is so passé, it really, you know, it's upsetting because its only value judgments will save this planet, in my opinion, as a philosopher. So we have to put the Geist back into the critique of capitalism. And that means that we have to get our theory absolutely like honed. I mean, I'm a doctor, a medical doctor of ideas, right? And I can diagnose the problems of this planet as, firstly, the capitalist system, war capitalism, but secondly, the critique of it, the communist system failed, because it didn't do its homework either. So I'm trying to come up with a new theory, which is my thesis of transpersonal history, which is like dialectical, historical science, plus history of spirituality, ethics, and soul. Like Jungians, I believe ultimately the history of mankind is the history of soul as it unfolds. And it takes economic, social and political form. But ultimately we're just souls trying to live out lives as well as we can. What we have to do is get the system recalibrated so that we can do that. What we do about Brexit, I think we just have to go on telling the truth, you know, individually, each of us. I think as it begins to impact on people's lives in Britain, they will become very disgruntled. The only people that will vaguely benefit from this, theoretically, are the extremely wealthy, who have offshore bank accounts in wherever. Well, Switzerland or you know, elsewhere. I don't think in Switzerland, because I think Switzerland's got to deal with the EU. You're a, you know, affiliate in some way.
Some way,
But I think, no, we're talking the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and these kind of places. But they won't benefit if the country goes downhill. You know, I also think that Scottish independence now is I think a fact, a certain fact, and I think the English should support that, at least the right to a second referendum. If they vote for independence, then, you know, that's their right. I don't think the English should create a sort of Catalan facing down nonsense. That would be sheer hypocrisy. So I think English MPs shouldn't stand in the way of the Scottish having a second referendum. That's an ethical duty. And English intellectuals, academia, teachers and so on should be working to enable that referendum to happen. I mean, I don't think I get to vote in that, even though my vote is in Scotland, where I lived for 7 years. I may get a vote in that. I also think that the situation of Ireland is very disturbing, because as a philosopher and historian for peace, you know, I've campaigned for peace in Ireland, because in my day, when I was in London in the 80s, the IRA was still bombing London. And I was teaching once and a huge explosion went off, rattled the windows, and it was in Docklands. A bomb had gone off. So IRA bombs in London and Britain, Manchester were regular. People were dying all the time in the streets of Belfast. I don't want to see a return to that. And I think the only way out of this is to give the people of Northern Ireland a referendum on whether they want to join the Republic. That was guaranteed under the Good Friday Agreement, which I helped in an indirect ways create. And I think that that Good Friday Agreement is more important than Brexit, honouring, because the people of Northern Ireland didn't vote for Brexit. So they might just say, well, actually, we'd rather join the Republic and stay in the European Union. And I think that's a second thing that should be campaigned for. Many Irish politicians are already saying that. And it's interesting, I don't know if you knew, but the Irish government of the Republic has offered the people of Northern Ireland to stay in Erasmus because Boris Johnson and his cronies have pulled the UK supposedly out of Erasmus. But the people of Ireland are wise enough to know it's very important, that young people like you get a chance to travel about and spend a year abroad. So the Irish government's going to fund students from Northern Ireland who want to go to European universities, which is a great thing.
It is.
I think Ireland deserves to finally be a country again. And yeah. So anyway, that's some of what we can do. But the most important thing is just go on telling the truth. And people in power, like people that run the BBC, people that run, the Privy Council, people that run the Constitution, the courts and so on, they should really, really reflect on their role in colluding in this this nightmare, which has been an unconstitutional coup, as far as I'm concerned, engineered by the Conservative Party. And the people that have bought power within the Conservative Party, they don't represent authentic conservatism. That was people like Dominic Grieve, who've been forced out, and Ken Clarke. These were moderate conservatives. The current lot who've taken over are just Mongolian, adventurers who've hijacked the country, i.e. the, Genghis Khan types. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think we changed the subject.
Sure.
We talked a lot about the Brexit and all the stuff. The next question is about your actual work. I know that you are working hard on your new book about religion, mathematics. So tell us a little bit more about what this new book is about and what your goal is, what you're working at.
Thank you, yeah. This is going to be the third volume of this. It's going to be a 4-volume, it's like an encyclopedia. I mean, it's a huge thing in huge scope. And I'm doing it because I think there's a problem with our society. I think my analysis of the divisions in our society, reflected politically, like in Brexit, like in Trump, Trumpism and communism and fascism and war-capitalism, all these things, are because in about 1650, European thinkers decided to split off spirituality and ethics into one corner and mathematics and science into the other. And we privileged this mathematical, scientific, materialist approach, and we neglected ethics and so on. Now, I think it was a mistake, unintentional to some extent. Descartes was partly to blame, and he comes from round the corner here in the middle of France. So this is sort of partly I'm trying to make good the mistakes of these previous intellectuals, right? Because as philosophers, we're all interconnected. We have a duty. If one of us falls down, we should try and help the other guys up. To me, we're all roped together climbing a mountain. And, if Nietzsche got some things wrong, then the next generation of intellectuals have a duty to point that out. Nobody's perfect. Even Hegel was a bit over-nationalistic and triumphalist and all that. And even Kant forgot about the rights of women, etc. Nobody's perfect. So what I'm trying to do, creating a religious mathematics, I'm trying to create a whole new subdivision of mathematics. There's algebra, geometry, topology, all kinds of branches of mathematics which are fascinating. And I've been trying to get an overview of mathematics. It's become so complicated now that it's very difficult to get a whole overview. It's applied in physics, there's mathematical physics. It's applied in biology, so mathematicians look at the way cells work and how mutations occur. It's applied in evolutionary theory, rates of change, genetics of mutation and so on. It's applied in astronomy. There's a mathematical branch of astronomy that looks at spectra and does spectral analysis of the stars. And it can work out distances and the scale of the universe, you know. These are some of the things mathematics has done. So it's advanced medicine, it's advanced cosmology, you know, it's done amazing things. It's created the computer revolution. Mathematics also was applied through Boolean logic to create computer systems, which Alan Turing helped and von Neumann, and they made the computer system based on binary maths. And it was a Japanese guy that thought of like how they actually could work, you know, back in the 50s. So I've been studying all that, and I'm just in awe of what maths has done. But the one thing it hasn't yet done is look at the internal ethical workings of the human heart and conscience. It hasn't yet even thought of that it might be useful when it's studying our spiritual beliefs and values. And it seems to me that's where we're falling down as a global civilization. We're brilliant now at creating weapons. I can create a weapon that could destroy Berne in 5 seconds, you know, and the British have. We've got nuclear bombs could destroy every single city in Switzerland in 10 minutes, you know. Well, what's the point of that? You know, it's ridiculous. And you guys don't have nuclear weapons, so you couldn't fire back, right?
No.
But that, to me, is the wrong use of maths. It's maths for war capitalism. What we haven't got is a way, for instance, of bringing harmony between the different Protestant and Catholic and other Christian denominations, right? So you're from a, you know, largely Protestant background in Swiss history, going back to the Baptists and the Mennonites and all that. Well, they were for years fighting the Catholics. You finally got a constitution where it doesn't matter. You've got peace in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Well, why can't we apply mathematics to working out a solution, permanent forever, between Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox and Gnostic branches of Christianity, say? Is it possible? If so, how? Well, that's what I'm looking at. I'm trying to create a religious mass that actually does something that creates peace between all the different rival religions. Not just Christians, but Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, pagans, Druids, the whole lot, right? Because I maintain these are partly mathematical problems. You know, Islam has a mathematical affirmation of the unity of God. Hinduism has a mathematical affirmation of the infinity and plurality of the gods and goddesses, as does paganism. Judaism has the same as Islam, a mathematical affirmation of the unity of God. Christianity has a mathematical affirmation of the Trinity and the unity of God. You know, and then some, because it's got all these different sects. So these are mathematical puzzles, and I'm trying to write a sort of textbook for future generations, scholars of religions and mathematicians, to come together in a common dialogue and solve these problems. Because I think unless we do that, you know, we might not survive to the next millennium. Yeah.
All right. Really interesting. You're not just writing at the moment. You also have some different kind of projects. As far as I know, there are like 3 big ones. One, I let you introduce it. What are the big projects you are at with other intellectual on the planet?
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes. Okay. So, I mean, my institute, which was set up at the University of London back in the 90s, is working on 3 big projects. I call them mega projects, right? And lots of other ones as well, but I'll just highlight the three mega ones. And they're architectural projects as well as sort of intellectual projects, and they're quite ambitious and quite far-reaching in their implications, right? So the first one is an idea that's come about through a colleague who's involved with the World Intellectual Forum, which I'm a European coordinator for, an Indian, a friend of mine from Singapore. And it's a very ambitious and wonderful project, which a small group are coming together to support. Okay, so the idea is to build a world peace tower, to be a showcase for peace thinking in a series of museums, exhibitions, conference space. Like, say, tourists would go on a tour and they would come away. It's like a giant peace museum. And the architectural challenge is to how to build it. So my friend's vision is that it should be a tower, like a world peace tower. And quite a tall one, not a small one, you know. So if you look at the world towers, the CN Tower, Canadian National Tower in Toronto is very tall, 500 meters or whatever. There are towers like this, tower buildings in Dubai and Doha, which are 500 meters, 600, 700, 800 meters tall. Those house office buildings and, sort of economic enterprises and so on. What we're suggesting is let's just have one such tall building on the planet which is dedicated to peace. Those are the kind of financial temples of our modern world, and they're in the City of London, Docklands, New York. They've built the World Trade Center 1 on the spot where the original World Trade Center towers were blown up. So they've rebuilt. That's the tallest tower building in the Americas now. It's many hundreds of meters high. What we want is one similar, a tower, which is the World Peace Tower, and it would be, we think, it should be in the southern tip of India. Why India? Well, because India is the homeland of most of the world's spiritual traditions. It's where Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism and Sikhism, Sufism, they all come from. And it's very tolerant of all the religions. There are Jews, Zoroastrians, Parsis were given homelands in India. I mean, I think it's the spiritual cradle of humanity. And the World Intellectual Forum was founded in India. I've been there 10 times. I love India, and it's just got the right atmosphere for a peace tower like this. Why on the southern tip? Because that's where Avalokiteshvara lives, the Buddha of universal compassion, who is called the lighthouse as a bodhisattva. So I'm thinking it could be either built slightly offshore as literally a lighthouse tower type thing, or it could be just inland at the Patalaka mountains, which is where he lives, out of body, and they're sacred to Shiva as well. Hinduism and Buddhism are so close. When you get to the place of enlightenment, they're like one and the same thing, actually. And that's why Hindus say Buddha was an incarnation of God. And so let's build a tower to honour all the gods, all the incarnations, all the traditions, and let's focus on peace, achieved through science and interfaith diplomacy. So that's it, and we're hoping it will be funded by everyone around the planet that wants peace. If we all gave $10 to this, it would be funded. It's not that expensive to do. So that's the first vision. What do you think of that?